Welcome back. Today we're doing something pretty foundational. We're taking this really diverse stack of sources, everything from ancient wisdom, ethical rules, to modern strength training ideas, and trying to build a kind of blueprint, looking for the architecture, really, of a well-built life.
Exactly. And if your life feels maybe a bit complex right now or maybe unstable, this deep dive should really resonate. We're trying to dig past all the surface noise and find those fundamental principles, things like internal consistency, physical balance, that moral strength you need for, well, balanced growth.
And we really have to kick off with what might be the biggest filter on, well, everything we do. A pretty stark truth. Ryan Holiday puts it plainly. We're all here, and we're all going to leave this earth eventually. Simple as that.
Yeah, that's incredibly humbling. But it's also incredibly clarifying, isn't it? If you truly accept that your time here is limited, it just instantly cancels out so much of the petty stuff we stress about.
Yeah.
Our sources are pretty clear on this. Because time is finite, we just have too much real work to do to waste energy comparing ourselves.
I found that really striking. So what does that boil down to, practically speaking? Since we're just temporary residents, we have to shift our focus completely. Stop the measuring game, who's richer, taller, smarter, and put that energy into the only game that actually matters long term, our own internal development, our own consistency. That shift, that redirection, that's really our mission today.
Okay, so let's unpack that first big concept, abandoning the scoreboard. The sources talk about this constant measuring and comparing who's got more, who stands taller as a delusion. Why is that system so fundamentally flawed?
Well, because it's basically an infinite game. At a zero-sum one at that, you can never actually win it. Think about it.
Yeah.
We arrive with nothing, we leave with nothing. Yet we spend all the time in between desperately trying to tally up external points that just vanish the moment we're gone. If you're playing by those external measurements, you're stuck on a field where the goalposts are always moving anyway. It's exhausting. Right. So if that external scoreboard is essentially meaningless in the grand scheme, we have to figure out what game we should be playing. And this leads to a really critical insight from the material. The only way to beat a game that never ends is to not play it.
Exactly right. You beat the comparison game, and you also beat the resentment game, which is really just keeping score of hurts and wrongs. By consciously deciding to walk off that field, you have to say, okay, my focus is on the quality of my effort, the integrity of my actions, not how much stuff someone else has piled up. Making that decision. That's really the first block in building genuine internal character.
Okay, so this internal game, this commitment to character, it needs structure, right? It needs, like you said, an architecture.
Yeah.
And surprisingly, the body itself gives us a really good map for how that internal philosophy shows up externally. We need symmetry.
Yeah, this is where Vladimir Janda's work comes in. It's fascinating. He found that the ultimate representation of harmony within the body is symmetrical and unrestricted movement patterns.
Oh.
When you see imbalance like one limb weaker or posture favoring one side, it's a sign the whole system is compensating for some internal weakness or imbalance. Physical asymmetry is basically the body broadcasting an internal lack of harmony.
That's a powerful metaphor. And the sources link this idea of balance, this symmetry, directly to our ethical structure, too. We see it in ancient guidance, like the structure of the Ten Commandments. They weren't just a random list, were they? There was a design there.
Oh, absolutely. A clear symmetry. You have four
Yeah.
commandments dealing with the vertical relationship that's our connection to purpose, the divine, the transcendent. Then you have six governing the horizontal, our practical day-to-day conduct with each other. Things like honesty, loyalty, respecting boundaries. And the point is, a life trying to stand only on the horizontal, just the practical, just how we treat others, without that vertical foundation of meaning, it eventually becomes unstable. It can collapse.
And the reverse is true, too, right? A life focused only on the vertical, maybe pious, but neglecting honest, ethical dealings with others. That's brittle as well. It's the integration, the balance between the two that creates stability. Which brings us neatly into the fundamentals of building strength, whether physical or moral. Dan John makes this sharp distinction. To train is not to strain.
That is such a key distinction, and it applies everywhere, not just lifting weights. Think about learning something new. Strain is like cramming all night for a test. You just fry your system, break down your focus, maybe retain it short term, but it's not sustainable growth. Training, on the other hand, is showing up consistently, spacing out the practice, progressively building your capacity over time. Patience is key.
So what's the actual consequence of strain, whether it's physical or, say, moral?
Well, strain breaks down tissue or confidence or integrity faster than it can recover and rebuild. It forces compensation. Physically, you might start using bad form to lift heavier. Morally, you might start cutting corners, telling small lies. You cheat the process. Training, however, respects where you are now, but systematically pushes the boundaries outward. But it needs a plan. It requires that discipline. Plan your work. Work your plan.
Okay, so how do we apply that kind of progressive planning to developing ourselves more holistically? Dan John's AIM framework, accumulate, intensify, transfer, is put forward here as a kind of universal model. I think people might know the terms, but maybe not the why behind that specific sequence.
The sequence is absolutely critical. It stops you from specializing too early, which can lead to burnout or like hitting a plateau. So first you accumulate. You might spend, say, 8 weeks just touching on maybe 20 different skills or virtues or areas of knowledge, but at a fairly low level. Just getting familiar, building a broad base. This creates resilience.
Right, like laying a wide foundation before you start building walls.
Yeah, precisely. Then, phase 2, you intensify. Now you narrow your focus. You pick maybe 5 or 6 key things, key exercises, core virtues, essential concepts, and you spend the next block of time, maybe another 8 weeks, really building depth and competence in those. If you jump straight to intensity without accumulating first, you risk injury, physical, or maybe even intellectual, because your base isn't broad enough to support it.
Got it. And then finally, there's this shorter, maybe 2-week transfer phase.
Yeah, that's where you take that strength you've built, whether it's physical power, moral resolve, or professional skill, and you deliberately apply it to the real world, the actual field of play, your life. You test it under pressure, adapt it to real situations. And this simple AIM structure, it gives us that recipe for building strength, building character. Train smart, rest hard, eat simply the sources mentioned, meat, veggies, water, basic stuff. And the absolute cornerstone, be consistent. Consistency is what makes the whole architecture strong.
So if consistency and symmetry are key to the individual's architecture, then the real test of that structure has to be how we interact with others. Right. Which brings us straight into this idea of the mathematics of forgiveness.
Right. We're talking about that famous exchange in the Gospels. Peter comes to Jesus and asks, basically, how many times do I have to forgive someone who keeps wronging me? Is 7 times enough? And Peter probably thought he was being pretty generous there because the standard rabbinical teaching at the time was, I think, 3 times.
Yeah, he thought he was doubling down and adding one for good measure. But the response he got was, well, it was something else entirely. No, not 7 times, Jesus says, but 70 times 7. And the sources emphasize this specific number, 490, that's not the point at all. What's the real significance of that seemingly impossible calculation?
It's about abandoning the calculator entirely. That's the key phrase. The moment you start keeping score, counting the offenses, you're choosing to stay locked in that grievance relationship. You're not just remembering what happened, you're actively maintaining a ledger. And every single mark you make on that ledger is like another link in a chain, tying you to the very person you probably want freedom from.
Okay, but I can hear some listeners thinking, wait a minute. If I just abandon the calculator, don't I risk becoming a doormat? Where's the line between forgiving for my own sake and just letting people walk all over me?
And that's a fair question. It's critical. Forgiveness isn't about saying the other person's actions were okay or that there shouldn't be consequences. Not at all. It's about freeing yourself from the burden of expecting that person to somehow pay back the debt before you can move on with your life. The terrible irony of resentment is that it hurts the scorekeeper the most.
Tony Dunny asks that piercing question. Who is really set free when you forgive someone else?
You are. Definitely you. The person who wronged you. They might have completely forgotten about it. Or maybe they're just incapable of feeling remorse. Who knows? But meanwhile, you are carrying that wound around like a heavy stone in your pocket, constantly pulling it out, re-examining it, showing it to others, reliving the pain. Forgiveness, seen this way, is really an act of self-liberation. It's refusing to let someone else's worst moment or their mistake continue to dictate the terms of your present emotional state. It's almost, well, a selfish act of self-care, in a way.
Okay, let's zoom out a bit now, from personal liberation to thinking about our responsibility to others and to the future. This idea of leadership's highest calling. Harvey Firestone put it very simply. The growth and development of people is the highest calling of leadership.
And fulfilling that responsibility demands we operate from hope, not cynicism. It really does. John Lewis was adamant about this. He saw optimism not as some naive wishful thinking, but as a deep necessity, a strategic imperative almost. You simply cannot effectively lead people or raise the next generation if you're constantly projecting doom and gloom about the state of things. It's paralyzing.
It really is about perspective, isn't it? The world is undeniably messy. History is full of mistakes, tragedies, but our job, maybe, is to show those coming after us the underlying structure beneath all that mess and decay. I really like the poet Maggie Smith's line that, despite everything, the world still has good bones.
That's beautiful. And yeah, our job as leaders, as parents, as mentors is to help others see those good bones, to convince them they're not just looking at ruins, but at a foundation. And more than that, to make them believe they can actually build something even better on that foundation than we did. But that requires being fiercely intentional about the stories we tell ourselves, and crucially, the stories we pass on.
Right. We need to make sure our stories are used as tools for cooperation to serve us. That distinction felt really important. We shouldn't be trapped by those old limiting narratives like, oh, people from our background don't succeed in that area, or everything's just getting worse, so why even bother trying?
Exactly. When we keep repeating stories of victimhood or grievance or inevitable failure, they tend to become self-fulfilling. They shrink our sense of agency and the agency of those who listen to us. We need to consciously choose and share stories of resilience, of progress, even incremental progress, and of fundamental human capability.
And this connects to Robin Sharma's definition of everyday heroism. It's often not about the grand gesture, but about something done at the hardest possible moment, he says. To uplift others when you least feel like it is to join the ranks of the heroic.
That timing, that's everything. It's easy to be encouraging when you're feeling great, when things are going your way. But when you're tired, you're frustrated, you feel like you've got nothing left in the tank, and then you choose to offer a kind word or support someone else, that reveals real character. That shows a strength built on that solid foundation we've been talking about.
And sometimes, maybe the most heroic and needed thing we can do is just be quiet, be present, listen. Irma Bombeck made that sharp observation, didn't she? That in our hyper-connected world, our society of super sophisticated communication, we ironically suffer from a shortage of listeners.
We really do. We confuse broadcasting, constantly putting our own story out there, with actually connecting. Hemingway had that interesting comparison, saying there is no friend as loyal as a good book. Why? Because a book waits. It listens patiently while you process it. It doesn't interrupt. It doesn't demand you listen back right away. Imagine if we could offer each other just a little bit more of that quiet, patient presence. That shortage of listeners, and maybe the deeper shortage of connection, might start to fade.
So let's try and bring all these threads back together now, back to the architecture. The sources, woven together, seem to paint a really clear, integrated picture for you, the listener. Essentially, stop pouring your finite energy, your limited time, into that zero-sum game of comparing yourself to others or holding on to old resentments. It's a waste. Instead, commit yourself day by day to the infinite game, the game of your own development, your own consistency.
That's the foundation everything else gets built on. It reminds me of Bill Walsh, the football coach, his principle: winners behave like winners long before they are winning.
Yeah.
Your character, your consistency, your discipline, those have to come first. They precede the visible achievement, the integrity you build when no one's watching. That determines how strong your foundation is when you finally step into the spotlight.
So the blueprint, when you strip it all down, is pretty straightforward, isn't it? Train smart, not just hard. Be consistent, above all else. Eat simply, take care of the basics, and prioritize forgiveness for your own sake by throwing away that mental calculator. And maybe most importantly, consciously choose to pass on hope, a sense of agency, and empowering stories to the next generation.
Yeah. We are all just temporary residents here. That's the starting point and the end point. So if you can accept the truth that maybe no one, and perhaps nothing, not even past mistakes or current world problems, is completely irredeemable, then the closing thought for you to mull over is this. What old limiting story, one that maybe holds you back or holds your children back, do you need to stop telling starting today? And what new, more empowering story are you going to start building instead?